Hello and welcome to the Publisher Podcast from Media Voices. Gosh, that feels weird to say for the first time. I'm Esther Thorpe and this is the first of our relaunched series where Chris Sutcliffe, Peter Houston and I are exploring the people and products powering publishing, both through the podcast and our adjacent weekly newsletter, the Publisher Newsletter, which you can sign up for at voices.media. We're really pleased to welcome BlueConic on board as sponsors of this season of the Publisher Podcast and Newsletter. BlueConic is the customer data operating system that makes your data work harder, so you don't have to. Whether it's capturing valuable audience insights or activating them with precision, the possibilities are endless with BlueConic's all-in-one platform. Learn more at blueconic.com, where data is for doing. So we're kicking off this season with Simon Kurs, who is the commercial editor at the Evening Standard. Their sustainable travel campaign, led by their podcast, picked up the best commercial strategy at this year's Publisher Podcast Awards. In this interview, we unpick the publisher's approach to their podcast monetisation strategy, from choosing clients that align with their values to having the podcast at the heart of a 360-degree media campaign. I started by asking Simon to explain how the award-winning podcast series with Iberostar came about and where it sits with the rest of the Evening Standard's podcast portfolio.
Firstly, thank you very much, Esther. We are thrilled to win this award. And actually, we're thrilled at the reception for this podcast full stop. I think the feedback from within the industry has been, universally fantastic, be it tourism boards, travel brands, our fellow journalists. Everyone has really been very, very positive about the product. And I think also that's been reflected in the listener numbers. So, it's not often that you can say, something is delivering for audience and for commercial partners and also creatively. So I think, we're thrilled with the product we've created. In terms of how it came about, I think it's very clear to all of us that the climate crisis is no longer a niche concern. Travellers are increasingly very, very keen to engage more sustainably with travel, as is the travel industry itself. The question for many travellers is how can we do it? And there's not really still a tremendous amount of definitive information out there for them on where to go, how to make choices in terms of hotels and travel and all these kind of things. And that was one of the reasons why we felt there was a need to launch a campaign like this in the first place. For some broader context as well, as I'm sure you're aware, the Evening Standard, which is a couple of years off 200 years old now, has a really long and storied history as a campaigning newspaper. Over the years, we've campaigned successfully on lots of issues that we feel are core to our readership and to our mission as a newspaper, be it safety on the streets, child poverty, violence against women, air quality as well. These are all things that, we feel are, really important for us to have a voice and really, pick up on these issues for our readership. It became increasingly clear for us that there was a need for a mainstream media voice to pick up the mantle around sustainable travel. And that's why we felt we wanted to launch this campaign. We also already knew our audience was receptive to this subject. And that's really, really crucial as well, I think, when you're thinking about any new editorial product. Our audience are among the most eco-aware of all news brand readerships. I think we're second only to The Guardian, actually. We also have a readership that are very keen travellers. They travel often, they travel far, they're curious about their travel choices. So they really are the perfect combination in terms of a receptive audience who want to know more about how they can potentially make more responsible choices. We felt there was a gap in the market for exactly this campaign with a podcast at its core, because I think a podcast is a really, really terrific medium for delivering this kind of storytelling. We felt this podcast needed to be conversational. We wanted it to be fun and lighthearted, full of information and inspiration, certainly not preachy in tone. I think that was really, really crucial because there's a lot of content out there, especially around sustainability and sustainable travel that is much more stick than carrot. And we felt that was not really a good way to mainstream this conversation. So that was our starting point. How does it fit with our other podcasts? Well, we've got a stable of four main podcasts here. Standard, which is our daily digest. We've got Tech and Science Daily, which is, it offers insights into the world of technology, gadgets and the like. The Standards Rugby podcast hosted by Lawrence Delalio. That's a really, really fun insider look on the world of rugby. And How to Be a CEO, which is, regular profiles of business leaders. It's a what I've learned style formats where we really dig deep into the CVs of really great CEOs, find out how they got to where they are, the kind of mistakes they made, and any advice and tips they have that they can deliver to our audience along the way. So that's our stable. All of those podcasts align really closely with our broader mission, which is very much to be the definitive go-to for news, business, and culture for Londoners. With regards to the Standards Travel podcast, what you're probably aware of is that rather than launching it as an entirely new show, what we actually did was we decided to piggyback off one of those existing shows, which was the Standard. So we took it over at the weekends and we created a weekly takeover for 6 weeks where we dug deep into sustainable travel.
That's performed quite well compared to the rest of the daily podcasts, hasn't it? That sort of that idea of like a weekend deep dive.
It has actually. I think, I won't say it surprised us because we obviously, we knew that the audience was there for the Standard. It is our best performing podcast. So, there is an audience that we can take away and we can carry with us there. As I said, we also knew there was an appetite for this kind of content. Travel really traffics very well on our website. It's a really popular subject. It's one where we have a good degree of authority. So again, that was really important. Key to this as well, this particular project, is that we brought in the right people. Juliet Kinsman, who is a name who's perhaps the best known name in sustainable travel journalism. She's been really kind of mainstreaming this conversation for more than 10 years. So she is the authority here, and she's very much our North Star in terms of making sure the content we produce is greenwash free and as authoritative as it can be. I think as well, the weekend aspect of it is really, really important. I think you look at consumption habits in terms of media, and we know that people are more inclined to turn to deeper dives and more lifestyle-based content at weekends when they've got a bit more time. So again, that fits quite nicely with a bit of a shift in terms of the tone of the podcast. So all these factors came into play, and we are delighted with the success. It's overperformed all of our expectations, even more than the Standard, which itself was performing really, really well. It's even performed, I have to say, better than many of the existing travel podcasts out there in the market. So we are really thrilled with that aspect of it.
Yeah. I'm quite curious, when this came about, was this a desire the editorial team had to cover sustainable travel that you then went out to find a partner for, or did the partner come to you first and you then sort of looked at what would align within the editorial proposition?
In this instance, we have been keen as a news brand to activate in the sustainable travel space for quite some time. We feel there was a need there. We felt that we were able to create that kind of platform to deliver it using our various storytelling channels. The campaign itself was 6 to 9 months in the planning before it launched in October, actually. It was always our intention to launch a podcast, and we always wanted to find a suitable partner for it. What I will say at this point as well is on a project such as this, it's really, really crucial that any partners we bring on board share the same values. In order for this kind of project around sustainability to have any kind of credibility, there really can't be any kind of whiff of greenwashing at all. It would undermine it.
People are quite good at sniffing these things out these days, aren't they?
People are, and it's not like we could work with a BP or a Shell or something like this on a project like this. It just simply wouldn't work. And that's not to say that they're not making great strides themselves in terms of their sustainable messaging, but what we needed to do was find a suitable partner that was really well progressed in that sustainability journey. Iberostar is exactly that. It's an industry leader. It's got this Wave of Change initiative, which is its internal program to become a more sustainable circular business. It is one of the most impressive in tourism. They're really pushing things forward in terms of waste and becoming a more circular business, using green hydrogen and other sustainable energy sources. They're also really passionate about marine environments and cleaning them up and engaging with local communities. So in fact, a lot of the key themes that Iberostar feel are representative to their brand values were also aligned with what we wanted to do. So we were talking to them about this project. They were really excited about the idea of doing a podcast, and we were really excited about working with them because we felt that we could really tell a great story together that aligned perfectly with our mutual values.
You mentioned earlier that it was quite a rounded campaign led by the podcast. What other things did you do to, I suppose, market the podcast, support the podcast, but because when I went on the site, there are quite a lot of articles and things as well. So could you just tell us a bit more about what the campaign looked like as a whole?
Of course. I mean, this was a full 360-degree campaign, and we wanted to create a fully populated ecosystem across all of our channels, and really drive our audience between all of those different touch points. I think that was really, really crucial. So when the campaign launched at the end of October, there was already pre-existing a large amount of content that we had produced, lots of service articles, inspiration pieces, think pieces, everything you need, like a great starter pack for anyone who really doesn't understand the subject, is unfamiliar with sustainable travel, to come to us and just and really start dipping their toes into it. So that was the base that existed there. We then launched the podcast, and alongside that were weekly articles in the print edition in the newspaper that dovetailed with the themes of each podcast each week. Also, pointed our audience towards that podcast with QR codes and the like. We then had a series of digital articles that followed up on the podcast that summarised the themes of the podcast. The podcasts themselves often reference articles that were on our hub, again, to drive people between them. And we would often use the same experts or some of the same authors of those articles to come on and share their expertise, depending on the themes of the podcast that week. Of course, social plays a really, really big part, and we put a lot of effort into creating an aligned and parallel social campaign that worked largely across Instagram and Twitter, which again took as a starting point the key themes of the podcast that week, but then ran with it in a different way. And we all know that video is a really, really powerful way to drive traffic, drive audience, drive engagement. And I think that's again, one of the key drivers of success for this campaign, that we did this across all of those different channels.
Was that based on the podcast, like a video podcast, or was that sort of separate video creative?
Well, so for example, I think it was in week 2 of our podcast, we asked the question, how easy can you travel sustainably on a budget? Because obviously, I think there is an assumption that it costs a lot to travel sustainably. So Phoebe Smith had written a great piece for us on that. She was a guest on the show that week, and the podcast was asking this question. We then did a kind of an Instagram reel based around some of the key takeaway points from that, alongside other bits of information. Some of it was, using video that Juliet herself had filmed on some of her travels. So it was actually, filmed specifically for the podcast.
How do you go about setting KPIs for a campaign like that? Because I think a lot of people that are listening to this, they might have done sponsored podcasts where they'll have had KPIs on the podcast, but that's a whole sort of 360 campaign. So how do you have separate KPIs for each output, or is it very much a holistic thing? Exactly.
So for each channel, we have an agreed number of impressions that we're going to deliver for our partners. With regards to the podcast itself, for host read sponsorships, of course, we can measure the success based on the number of those impressions, and they're pre-guaranteed. And what I would say is we always tend to over-deliver on those. For branded episodes, we'd give an estimate of the number of downloads that we were likely to see, with an upper and lower number, based again on existing data on those shows. We've done this successfully with various brands in the past, AXA, Eon, Berghaus, with takeovers of our Tech and Science podcast, How to Be a CEO. So we have a well-oiled machine in place to do this. With regards to articles, again, for Iberostar in this case, they did have one piece of branded content, and again, we will promise a certain number of impressions and views, depending on whether that's in print or online, and again, we'll deliver on that. What I would say is as well, though, and this is key, and I think a lot of the value of this partnership was that it was editorially led. So Iberostar, were really, really benefiting from the earned media that came alongside this, and the large amount of editorial support that we were able to deliver for this, because it was an editorially led project, because it was something that the Evening Standard was throwing its weight behind as a news brand. And I think that's what really, really helped it to cut through the noise, I have to say.
I know you work on the commercial side of a lot of different products on the Evening Standard. I'm curious about how podcasts are, so maybe there's been a change in it, but how they're being regarded by advertisers. I know there's historically quite a large amount of suspicion around audio. Do you think that they're sort of being seen as something maybe a bit sexier to get involved in now, or is there still a bit of sort of maybe over expectation about what audio can deliver?
I think audio is a terrific canvas for storytelling. We know it's a brilliant way to connect with audiences in an authentic, intimate manner. I think the brands that we're speaking to are increasingly of the same opinion. I have to say that since we launched this podcast, everyone that I've spoken to about a follow-up on this sustainable travel campaign, whether it's tourism boards or other travel brands, the podcast is the first thing that comes up in the conversation. They're really keen to get involved because they've seen that it works. They've seen the value of being part of such a brilliant project. And I think going forward, I think we'll see more of that, especially now that we have the data to prove it.
Are there things that you're learning from this that you're taking forward into your future commercial podcast strategies?
I do think that collaboration between the commercial and editorial sides of a publisher is really crucial. It really enabled us to push the envelope in terms of the scope of the storytelling, while also ensuring the client's own objectives were satisfied. The fact that we could really go big about this across all of our channels really helped to amplify it and really, put a spotlight on the storytelling there. And what I have to say is there was genuine enthusiasm from our editorial team about this podcast because it aligns so closely with the values of the paper as a whole. And it's something that the audience team, for example, across social could really get their teeth into. It's an easier win than other types of shows, I would say, to really go big on.
Podcasts have got a bit of a sort of measurement, I don't know if it's a measurement problem, in that often all you know is sort of maybe age, maybe geo. The metrics you get tend to be more focused around how long you've listened, maybe the device you've listened on. Do you find clients are okay with that? Or have you found ways that you're maybe able to give them a bit more information on who is listening?
That's a tricky one. I think it depends on the clients. They always ask the question. I think, as we all know now, decisions now are data-driven around audience. It's really crucial that you're delivering the right audience for us. We know certain things about our audience in terms of age, geolocation, as you said, and broad demographics as well. What we do know is, and I think, again, the benefits of being a multi-channel news brand is that we do a lot of research into our audience anyway. So we have a lot of data on consumption and demographics and demographic segments of consumption across all of our various channels. And what we can see is they align quite closely with our podcasting audience anyway.
And I suppose this is an advantage that publishers have over maybe podcast only brands, is that you've got that huge supporting platform that you can use to drive and I suppose to create a more rounded campaign.
I think that's absolutely it. If you speak to brands these days, then it's omni-channel is the key word here, isn't it? I think that people want to be telling different stories across different channels, and in order to deliver different messages. What we have is we have a massive audience. More than 13 million people connect with us, engage with us through our various channels. So to be able to approach a brand and speak to them and say, well, look, we can engage with you and tell your story across all of these different channels in lots of different ways, and it can all join up, and we have a strategy behind it which links it together, and it drives traffic and it drives engagement and interest. I think that's a really powerful proposition for any kind of commercial partnership.
We've had marketing bingo this week. We've had omnichannel, we've had 360.
Yeah, I hate using those words sometimes. I know they are jargony, but they are the best way to describe that approach, I think.
Yeah. Podcasting has got a bit of a reputation in that it can be quite a one-way method of sort of delivering messaging. Have you found that you've been able to get feedback from the audience in any way, maybe via any of the other channels? I suppose what's the reception been?
I mean, it's difficult to say. I think we've had a lot of social activity around this. I would gauge the reception primarily on the engagement. And I think, as I said before, the numbers were really up on, I think, nearly 20% up on the standards regular daily figures, which for me shows a tremendous amount of engagement. What's really interesting as well is they increased as the season went on.
Oh, that's a good sign.
And it is, exactly. And I think we went really big in terms of marketing this at the start. So we did a takeover of the standard prior to the podcast launching. As I mentioned, there were a lot of articles that right at the start that really spotlighted this. But you would think, there could be a degree of boredom setting in if people didn't engage it. But what we found was by episode 6, we were still delivering as big, if not bigger numbers in terms of audience. And, in terms of the social as well, some of the most engaged with the reels on Instagram, for example, happened halfway through. So I think it just depends on the subject matter again. And, I think podcast in particular, there was a really, really great chemistry there between Juliet and her host. It was very, very conversational. Again, I felt it was very audience friendly. It wasn't preachy at all. It felt like something that people could become part of, when they're listening to this. I think that's really, really crucial for any good podcast, is that chemistry and that accessibility as much as anything else.
What would your advice be to other publishers who are looking to build out the commercial side of their own podcast strategies?
I think that's a really good question. And I keep banging on about this, but I think joined up thinking is really, really crucial. How can you use all of the channels at your disposal to promote and amplify the podcast? I think understanding your audience, again, is really, really, really important. What is the best way to tell a story in order to engage them? We were unsure, for example, how listeners would react to an extra edition of the Standard, particularly with a sponsored campaign, but we also knew that if the content was good and resonated with their interests, then it would be a success, and it was. I would suggest, and this is not always possible, but where possible, work with commercial partners with whom your values align. Again, I think it makes things so much easier. It means you can create a product that doesn't feel forced, doesn't feel overly commercial. Authenticity is really, really important, particularly in the world of podcasting. And if you're having to shoehorn in commercial messaging that doesn't fit with the overall tone or tenor of the storytelling, then that's going to be a problem. And finally, as well, I think do your research. As we all probably agree, the world doesn't necessarily need another podcast. There are so many of them out there. How do you cut through the noise? It's almost impossible sometimes. So I think you need to make sure that there is a gap in the market to explore and exploit there before you launch anything.
Thanks so much to Simon for speaking to us. Don't forget, we've got a write-up of the key learnings from this interview on voices.media, or dropped into your inbox every Tuesday if you sign up to the publisher newsletter, also on voices.media. This season is sponsored by BlueConic, the operating system that enables publishers to unlock higher returns and greater success from customer data. You can learn more about them at blueconic.com, where data is for doing. We'll be back next week with another dive into the people and products powering publishing's future. Until then, keep up with all things Media Voices by following us on LinkedIn and subscribing to our weekly newsletter over on voices.media. See you then!